Hello, everyone. My name is Ibis Garcia Zambrana. I am assistant professor in City and Metropolitan Planning at the University of Utah. And today I will be presenting a co-author paper that is titled On the Outside Looking In, Latinx and African American Students' Perspectives on Community Engaged Courses at Predominantly White Institutions in Planning Education. Over the past several decades, the university enrollment rate in the United States among African Americans and Latinx students has increased in terms of percentage, not in numbers, to whites. For example, the Latino student population went from 8% in 2008 in 2008 and 14% in 2018. And for African Americans, it went from 7% to 11%. Despite the increased enrollment rate of African American and Latinx students in academia as a whole, including the field of urban planning, research on the perspectives of Latin American and also um, African American students remain understudied. And there's even less research about the students' perspectives in community engaged learning courses. Scholars have documented how community engaged learning helps students prepare to work with diverse communities. Studio courses are the staple of the planning curriculum, and generally speaking, the studio or capstone environment emulates closely the workplace experience, and pedagogical is a pedagogical tool to socialize students and prepare them for the practice of professional planning. There are many benefits to studio courses for being able to apply the planning knowledge obtained in their courses in the real world setting, developing further much needed interpersonal and intercultural dialogue skills or cultural competency, employer support workshop based courses because it gives students the opportunity to work in highly political wicked problems. Many of these studios courses take place in communities of color, but not much research exists on the topic. A studio or workshop courses taking place in communities of color can help students to work with multiple publics, learn about diverse communities, and confront their preconceived notions through a reflective planning practice. This article specifically focuses on the perspectives of African American and Latinx urban planning students and in their community engaged courses, interactions with students and faculty, and engagement with communities of color at predominantly white institutions. We asked the following questions. What are African American Latinx urban planning students' perspectives on community engaged learning in communities of a shared racial and ethnic background? How these students prepare for the experience? What are the tensions they perceive between their class and their communities when they were immersed in the neighborhood? How did students feel after the course ended? And what are the gaps in supporting African American and Latinx students in community engaged learning in communities of a shared racial and ethnic background? This study is part of a larger POSIG or Planners of Color Interest Group research project using mixed methods approach, including an online survey and interviews to capture the perspective of all students in planning programs. The online survey was completed by 451 students in 2018. Although not the focus of this paper or survey methods and findings are highlighted in several publications, which can be found in the ACSP page under POSIG. For this study in particular, we interviewed 22 African American Latinx planning students across the United States. There's like 4 themes that I will be discussing, even though the paper has 6 themes. One, precise why students are at the center of the classroom dialogues instead of community engagement skills. 2, the need to teach others about racism. 3, on site, what are the rewards, frustrations, embarrassments, and acts of violence that they experience. Um, the 4, post site, keeping connections, giving back, and the guilt of leaving communities. Most of the students describe very little preparation before entering community engaged courses in communities of color. One student said, we read about planning, urban renewal, redlining, and that was the extent of our preparation. Another student added, there was only one class period dedicated to understanding our biases, stereotypes, and prejudice. However, most students of color discuss how in these conversations they were centered about on whiteness. A student said, I wanted to talk about the community partners and what we will be working with, conversations about white privilege and white people at the center are at the center of conversations about race, and then people of color are the margins of that conversation and they are not at the center. Instead of talking about whiteness, students want to learn about how to engage with communities. On the second theme, Latinx and African American students feel the need to teach others about issues related to race and ethnicity. A student added to the conversation, I have the sense to need to invest my time of helping white people to be allies. In that circumstance, who is that benefiting? It is not benefiting me and other students of color. We should not be expected to work so hard emotionally in these classes. We should not be expected to do the work for the professor. At the same time, students of color feel uncomfortable speaking for the African American or Latinx community because they are not experts on racism. They're also learning about it. For example, a student said, I'm expected to know everything related to race and racism. There's still a lot of things that I'm working within my own understanding of marginalization. The third theme was what happens when students were on the site. Some Latinx and African American students expressed feeling discouraged by their white peers. Students shared, I can tell you about the types of frustrations that fell dealing with white students and how they went about the course and being on the site. They were like, I'm just doing this to do it because I have to do it for class, for credit. And I was like, these people need our help and you're just going there and acting like it doesn't matter. They will ridicule me for caring too much. Another student expressed their disappointment with this elite and disengaged attitude. There is a disconnect between academia and these communities. There's a lot of elitism going on from the students when they go to other places. There's this lack of access by these communities into academia, but most students will never get that. They show up and they will say, I'm from the university, please fill out a survey, and they expect them to do it. When you grew up in a community that was marginalized by white people, you don't want to see white people in a black space demanding things. Another student spoke very strongly about interpersonal violence in communities and how it hurts students of color. Sometimes it's very violent to bring students into predominantly communities of color because they are not reflective. They don't understand the full weight of history. And at times they are disrespectful by talking about reverse racism. There's a lot of that disconnect. Students of color are affected more by this behavior. You bring a lot of white students that are unprepared, and this is embarrassing for us. On the last team, students of color feel anxious because the semester will end, and that will mean that the relationship with the community will also end. And students spoke about these feelings. It gave me a lot of anxiety because I said, great, I'm working with this community, but what's going to happen after that? I was feeling guilty because I knew a semester will end and I will abandon these people. I felt pressure to make connections, especially with young people, because in a way I was the role model. As students spoke about their guilt that failed when they ended this new relationship. I created genuine connections. I walked down to a community meeting, people acknowledged and affirmed you. The hospitality of the community was intense. I was treated better by the community, by strangers than by my white classmates. I created relationships and then I felt and then I left. And that sucks. If I cannot continue, what is the long-term effect I'm having on myself? Because I feel bad about leaving and on the people and the effect on the people I interacted with. So the findings of the research have emphasized the uh, perceptions of African American Latinx in community engaged courses in planning. Most of the preparation was geared towards professors teaching students about white privilege and white supremacy. Latinx and African Americans saw this teaching strategy as a way to center whiteness. This is an inherent dilemma. The questions for educators as well as learners is how can we name white privilege, but at the same time dissenter whiteness. Students of color felt that they are fully aware of the dialogue of inequality and its relationship to race, yet they were unprepared to engage with communities in a way. What students spoke about is that learning about racism is not enough. They want planning skills and allowing them to engage with communities to be successful as future practitioners. It should be the professor's responsibility to help students to enter sites. Students also felt responsible for educating others and correct misconceptions, experiencing eventual fatigue in addressing microaggressions and adverse interactions between classmates themselves and the community. Since students did not feel fully embraced by their departments or white colleagues, African Americans and Latinx students frequently immerse themselves in this community engaged work as a way to be acknowledged. As a student put it, they went to the community and felt human. Students of color frequently feel needed by these communities, and many times communities want students to keep them working on projects. However, faculty members need to help students to manage their guilt. Professors can also prepare community members for when students leave. Ideally, the professor will engage in a long-term relationship with these communities, and thus the communities will feel that there's some kind of continuity. So thank you very much.